Hello, good morning and good afternoon from wherever around the world you are joining us. This is Scott Dill with Real Story Group, and thanks for taking some time on your day to join us for a presentation on shaping customer journeys. We're going to be exploring the question of whether journey orchestration engine technology is right for you. This is certainly a hot topic and one we've been talking with our subscribers about for the past several months, so it's great to be able to share some insights with you folks today. And my colleague and our founder, Tony Byrne, will be taking us through the heart of today's presentation. But as we get started, I did want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping items of note. First and foremost, if you have any questions during today's session, we will have some time at the end to get to those. So please feel free to ask those in the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. Also, for all the attendees, you will be able to access the slides from today's session. So our marketing team will get those to you by the end of this week. So keep an eye out for that. And then for our subscribers online, you'll be able to access a recording of today's presentation in your subscriber library. So again, keep your eyes peeled for that when it does come available. I do want to mention a couple things about Real Story Group and who we are. So we are at heart an analyst firm, and where we tend to focus is on the different markets that you see on this map here, which is what we're calling Omni-channel technology stack. You'll see the different areas we cover are represented by lines of the subway. And today we're going to focus on the purple line, which is journey orchestration engines. It's a marketplace that we've been following for a number of years, but really just started to publish research on it over the past year, and have seen some great results come from that, and getting some excellent insight from our customers into their own experiences with journey orchestration engines. So we're excited to share that with you today. One thing I do want to mention also about Real Story Group and our model is the fact that we're different from other analyst firms in that we never work for the vendors that we cover or advise them on their strategy in any way. Our focus is on technology users and buyers, so you can be sure that you're getting the real story about what the vendors do well, but also, perhaps more importantly, what they don't do so well, where they could fall short for you. I'm going to let Tony take over from here and talk a little bit more about that and really take you through the heart of today's presentation. Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I founded Real Story Group in 2001, really based on this quadrant that you see on the left, this idea that you can pick vendors generically as winners and losers, which is how traditional analyst firms work. We decided that we were going to focus on what's the best fit. And as Scott mentioned, our evaluations are quite different in that respect, in really two respects. One, we're intensely more critical because we're independent. We don't rely on vendors for our income stream the way Gartner and Forrester do. And then secondly, our focus is not who's the best vendor, but what's the best fit for you. And so we have various tools on our site that you can go see where you can generate your own custom kind of quadrant based on your scenarios and use cases. And, that was a really interesting way to approach the journey orchestration engine marketplace as well, which is a very kind of somewhat technical space. But it turns out, as we'll see in a minute, that it's really business use cases that should drive everyone's analysis of it. So first, let's start out with a little background here. I think we all know, as we trying to stitch together customer experiences across different journeys, that we're learning, whether we like it or not, that very often these experiences are isolated, disjointed, and inconsistent. And a big part of the reason for this is that we have these different engagement silos: ads, website, email, mobile, social, print, voice, chat, point of sale or face-to-face, so on and so forth. And historically, we've been trying to build these silos to make them really smart, but they've each had their own content, their own data, their own rules and decisioning, which is what we're going to talk about today, typically their own embedded planning services and their own analytics. And so we're trying to stitch this stuff together horizontally, and it's not really working very well, and that's why you have these really inconsistent customer experiences. So our main kind of theory going forward for the 2020s is that to have an integrated customer experience, you're going to have to break some services out into foundational enterprise-wide services. So certainly omni-channel operations, unified customer data, likely in the form of a CDP, you see here in orange, and then in light purple, journey orchestration. And that's what we're talking about today, which is around omni-channel personalization, next best action rules, and a whole lot of other stuff. But the goal here is to create more coherent interaction with your customers wherever you're interacting with them. The other piece to this that we've just released is omni-channel content, which is a single source of the truth for reusable assets. Really interesting technology. You can go see a recorded webinar that we've done about that, but today we're going to focus primarily on journey orchestration. And so always we like to also take a look at this from an enterprise architecture perspective. So this is our omni-channel technology stack model. Again, this is a reference model. Your stack may be different, and this is also aspirational, right? That you've got these different engagement channels and interaction delivery services, content and engagement management services that we all recognize, CRM, social, email, WCM, so forth, but then these enterprise foundation services. And so this is truly a very different way of thinking about digital, but the good thing is that it allows you to be much more customer centric going forward. The key thing that happens here is that although you still have these channel specific services in the content and engagement management layer, like contextualization of the experience, assembly and delivery of the experience, interaction, right? That's still important. What you've done is you removed out of those platforms key enterprise-wide services, certainly core data, core content, insights, and then what we're interested in today is orchestration and personalization. How can we orchestrate and personalize a more coherent customer journey across all of these different silos? So it means moving, so omni-channel journey orchestration is part of a broader both trend and we think aspiration of pushing enterprise services lower in your stack. So we sometimes call this Pilates, working on your core capabilities rather than, you know, your sort of upper body muscles. So where is an enterprise to start? And once again, I'll remind you that if you have any questions or comments or want to share your story, feel free to use the questions tab in the Go to Webinar Control panel. So the place to start clearly is with quantitative and qualitative listening. This is an example of some quantitative listening from a journey orchestration engine I'll talk about a little bit later, where you're just getting some data about what's actually happening across your journeys. Many of you are doing this now using data warehouses like Snowflake and visualization engines like Tableau. You're also finding that this is pretty hard, that you're not always getting all the data you need, but this is where you can start today. Also, voice of the customer can be very good for quantitative listening and also qualitative listening about what's happening. So we see a lot of activity around voice of the customer. So, even if you're just getting started with journey mapping and orchestration, you may already have some of the tools to be able to do this. Then the other place that this then, takes us to is journey mapping, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's a variety of different tools. We're going to be releasing some research around these tools shortly. And these are ways that you or an external consultancy can help you map sort of what's going on, right? And there's a lot of different methodologies and certainly visualization paradigms here. This is kind of a traditional sort of Visio approach that's been amped up a little bit. Here's something a little bit more complicated, but you've got different personas and these things here. You have even empathy maps. There's a lot going on here. One of the things about journey maps is sometimes there could be so much going on that it can feel sort of overwhelming. This is replicating a traditional kind of consultancy approach where you're using sticky notes to try to capture this stuff, including things like pain points and opportunities. Here's a kind of a shorter version of the same thing, probably visually a little bit more clarified, really a lot of focus on different touch points, during a very well-defined customer journey. And then here's another one that tries to sort of put all those things together. Again, a lot of information on the page. What I do like about this one is the heat maps at the bottom, like where are we doing well and maybe not doing well. And this brings in a lot of data. So there's a variety of different ways to map, your as-is journeys and start analyzing this. I guess the question that I have for you that I'll invite an answer in the questions tab is that what happens now? Okay, we've built this map of our existing customer journey. What do you think the typical enterprise then does or asks themselves? So if you want to just even put your answers in the questions tab in the go to meeting, I invite you to say, hey, what's the next step, right? And so, clearly one of them would be, okay, we have an as-is map. We don't like certain things about it. Could we create a to-be map, right? Yeah, sure, create a to-be map. It's still just a documentation of a particular process. It's not actually anything that's going to activate a process. So, the typical enterprise then turns around and, executives say, when we've seen these journey mapping exercises, and the executives say, okay, now what? What's the action plan? And, there's a lot of different ways of approaching this. I think there are certain individuals and vendors like vendors like Pointillist that say, well, you should just listen and then just adapt in your different channels, change your website, change the way you do email, and you can do that. But that alone may not necessarily give you coherence across all of your channels. So, eventually this takes you to actually wanting to do something about this. And that then leads us to journey orchestration technology. So what does journey orchestration technology do? It takes data and events, and first it should help you listen and map, right? So maybe you've already done some listening and mapping. The journey orchestration engine may give you more capabilities to do that and to sort of up your game there. But the big thing it should let you do then is plan and model. In other words, how do we want to change the customer experience across these different touch points, and then activate a particular elements and paths within a journey and visualize how that's going. So it's actually converting from a map to actually become then an execution engine to actually modify these journeys in flight. And then you analyze and optimize the results and as you go along. The key thing is for any proper journey orchestration engine is it needs to work across ideally all of your potential channels, not just marketing, not just ads, not just service, not just your website like a personalization engine might do. Now, the key thing here, this is what it does, but whenever Real Story Group evaluates technologies, we always look at what are the canonical business use cases. So most of us are still here, we're listening and mapping, but how do you get to plan and model? Well, you really want to be thinking about what are we trying to do with this technology? It sounds really sexy. You'll see some interfaces going forward that look pretty slick, but what are the key things that we're trying to do? Certainly, we've got a couple of use cases in the lower left around customer acquisition. Very important for all of us, and certainly something that we could be doing much better as our prospects are interacting with us across multiple channels. Sales enablement is a big one, even if you're already using an enablement platform like Salesforce Outreach, because while that's in flight, it can have enormous impact on other things that prospect or customer is doing with you. So you need to have a broader omni-channel view of it. Certainly revenue optimization and retention. This is kind of a historic use case for the early journey orchestration engines, which were essentially decisioning systems. Service and support, which we now happens not just through your contact centers. It's happening all over, and so you need to be able to orchestrate those experiences and improve that. And then finally, channel partner orchestration, which is increasingly important as many of us have diverse sort of go-to-market channels and strategies here. So this is how Real Story Group evaluates these different journey orchestration engines according to these 6 use cases. What's the right fit? And these are the ones that we would suggest that you think about prioritizing as well. So who are those vendors? This is a subset of that subway map that Scott showed you. And you can see here on the purple line, the light sort of magenta line, that there's a mixture of major vendors from the city center here: Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe, and Acoustic, which is the rump of the IBM portfolio, and then a whole raft of mid-range players, and then some pure play players as well. So that's how when we first came out with this research a year ago, that's kind of how we divided the market, was sort of like these major players against these pure play. Since then, the market has evolved, and I think our understanding of it has evolved, and we've got a somewhat more elaborate classification of these tool sets. So Yeah, you've got these MarTech suites, Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe, and HCL, which is the former IBM campaign, and that purport to do this. You'll see that usually what they're talking about is something based on their outbound email messaging platform, with the idea being that that's really the heart and soul of the journey. And in many cases, it's not. So these are really quite limited platforms in that regard. Then you have a variety of pure play vendors who really try to work across truly omni-channel journeys. A lot of interesting solutions here. Thunderhead is interesting because that's the one that Salesforce OEMs as Interaction Studio to complement Journey Builder. Then in the upper right, you have some that came out of a traditional kind of BPM vertical environment, Infor and Pega being the most famous, BPM Online, now called Creatio. And so these are for very complex rules-driven journeys. All of them acquired these tools in the past, fairly old, long-standing decisioning systems. So really powerful stuff. Some issues around those vendors, though. Then you have others that focus primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on journey analytics. So they're doing more journey listening and interpreting for you, a little lighter on the actual then modeling and execution of decisions and personalization. Then you have some important players coming out of the contact center space. And remember again that sales and support and all the related activities around that are now an omni-channel story. And so you have vendors who have been historical heavyweights in that space, also now purporting to provide omni-channel journey orchestration engine. You can tell just by that, you can imagine that just the way that IBM and Oracle and Adobe historically focus on their strength, which is in MarTech, NICE and Genesis focus a lot on their strength, which is in contact center. Everyone, of course, calls themselves omni-channel. Not all these vendors are truly omni-channel. And here again is just an example. This is from Oracle Responses. If I had put Oracle, any other Oracle product like Eloqua here, you would have seen the same thing, a kind of a palette that is very messaging oriented. The idea here is, everything kind of hinges on an email. I could maybe trigger other things happening in another system, or another thing could trigger something in my system, but what I really care about here is sending emails and messages. And so that's kind of like its viewpoint into omni-channel. We think it's actually rather limiting. There's a number of experienced vendors who in many cases have acquired different solutions. Teradata is one of them, and this is a typical kind of modeling interface. You'll see this thing here in the middle. Channel splitting is often an interesting step where you want to find out how do we want to communicate with this person. In an ideal world, a reusable step like that, I should say the logic there should be reusable and more object-oriented and be able to apply across different journeys as you're modeling. Not all systems can do this. We get into a lot of detail about that in our vendor evaluations. Infor is interesting, very powerful solution, also acquired from a long-standing decisioning engine, worked a lot in B2C and B2B environments. What they do is bundle a kind of a quasi CDP. They don't call it a full standing CDP, and I think that's to their credit. By CDP, I mean customer data platform, but they do assume that they've got the customer data right close at hand, and you actually build segments in the journey orchestration, which normally you would do in a CDP or a customer data mart. So they've kind of bundled those two together. A couple thoughts about this. One, architecturally, we kind of don't like that because your CDP should be independent of your Joe and vice versa, because they need to talk to a number of other systems, and you probably want best fit you're not going to get from the same vendor. But the second thing that this does highlight, though, is that very often these two systems, or the need for these two systems, tend to travel in pairs. In other words, what happens is we see among subscribers that they license a CDP. They're like, okay, now how am I going to orchestrate and activate all this data? Or they license a journey orchestration engine, which is going to depend very heavily on you having organized segments and a unified source of customer data. And you say, okay, I need a CDP. So these two tend to travel together. Our argument is, in very rare cases, would you want to be getting them from the same vendor. Obviously, analytics is important, and what a journey orchestration engine should be able to do is tell you who is in what step of which journeys and where. Some of them can be more goal-oriented, others are a little bit more passive and just watching, but that's a key kind of benefit from this. We also argue you should be able to export all of these metrics out to larger, more enterprise-wide reporting systems as well. So this really, the technology is very exciting because basically, if we're sitting around like many of you are journey mapping today, you're sort of giving you that chance to say, hey, I can convert this big poster of a journey into something, if it's a to-be journey, into something really actionable, and I can change the way we're interacting with our prospects and customers through a journey orchestration engine technology. And that's really exciting, but it will immediately raise key issues. And here's some of the things we've been talking about with some of our enterprise subscribers. First is governance. How do you govern any of this kind of foundational technology when it has to reach across traditional silos? The skill sets that you need to do this are phenomenal. We have just joking there, Homer in front of the nuclear power plant, but it can feel that way when you're at these controls. And also the breadth of scope, like, are you going to let your journey orchestration engine touch all of your different platforms, and what does that mean in terms of what happens in the individual channels? We know that journey listening is hard, that you're going to discover that the data you get from different channels and decision points is going to be inconsistent across points and not always the same level of value. And so there's a lot of work to be done there. The good news is you can start that work now. The other question that comes up often is this where personalization is going to be happening in the future, as opposed to personalizing my email and then having a separate personalization system for my website and a separate personalization system for my chatbot and so forth? And we think the answer is yes, that you're going to want to move personalization logic lower in your enterprise so that it can be more coherent across channels. So oftentimes these questions fall to this person who we call Stacy, the stack owner. Stacy's responsible for the MarTech or the Omni-channel stack. She gets a lot of questions around this, particularly around journey mapping today. At Real Story Group, our mission in life is to create a kind of a shield around Stacy where we help her answer whatever questions she gets and helps her think about what her future stack is going to look like over a nice lunch. So if you are Stacy, certainly we welcome engaging with you. There's 3 ways you can take advantage of our research. The first is what we call vendor selection advisory, where you get access to all of our hard-hitting journey orchestration engine technology research. You use this to empower your selection team with really deeply critical research and also candid advice, and some of our selection tools like our Real Quadrant generator. Some of our subscribers opt for an all-in, all-you-can-eat approach, which we call Omni-channel stack advisory. This is for stack owners who have strategic decisions and technology resources. They get access to all of our research about all the vendors and all the best practices. And then a subset of those individuals then join our private executive council, which is just for enterprise omni-channel stack leaders. It's, of course, a vendor-free environment where we share best practices and help each other out. So let's wrap up with some key takeaways. First, you want to start with journey listening, including quantitative and likely with tools you already have. So if you already have Data Warehouse or Data Lake and you've got reporting and visualization tools, you can start doing this. And again, you'll discover that you're probably going to need to work on your data normalization and data integration. Definitely do journey maps. Start with your as is, but then brainstorm to be. This may take you even beyond digital orchestration, deeper into your enterprise to start thinking about service design, which is a big step and an important step in many journeys. You want to build a governance structure around omni-channel journey orchestration because you're going to have to work with a lot of your peers across different engagement silos to make this work. And in particular, you're going to need to get your customer data house in order because most of these journey orchestration engines assume that you have people bucketed into different segments. You definitely want to prioritize your business objectives and certainly your use cases. Use cases are what we use to evaluate technology is what you should use to evaluate technology and make sure that you're meeting your business objectives. And then you want to research and vet your Joe technology at this point. And this is obviously where we can, I think, help you and very uniquely by providing you the real story on what works and what doesn't work among these different vendors. And then always, whether you work with Real Story Group, subscribe to our research or not, make sure that you try tools before you buy them. So with that, I will turn it over to Scott and wrap up. And again, invite you, we do have a few minutes for questions. If there was anything still on your mind or something you wanted to dig deeper, feel free to use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel.
Thanks, Tony. And as Tony mentioned, we recommend trying tools before we buy them. And you can also actually do that with Real Storage Group's tools, as we have interactive applications that can help you to narrow down a short list and compare vendors side by side. So whether it's journey orchestration engines or any other markets that we cover in our research, you can go on our site and try out those interactive tools. And then if you want to get an even more in-depth look at what will be available to you as a Real Story Group subscriber, reach out to us at explore@realstorygroup.com, as we'd be happy to show you that behind-the-scenes tour of our subscriber experience. I did want to mention that we will be hosting another webinar at this time next Wednesday. We'll be taking a look at the updated Omni-channel vendor map that we showed you at the beginning of today's session, give you a little bit more details on the trends we're seeing for this year, but also what we expect to see in the 2020s. So certainly hope you can join us for that. And as Tony mentions, if you do have questions or feedback, please enter that into the control panel. Tony, are you seeing anything on your side?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that have come up. First, Jamal has asked about journey mapping and journey mapping methodologies and tools. There's certainly a lot of tools. I showed you some examples of those, and we're going to be actually publishing some research shortly for our subscribers, comparing and contrasting some of the online tools that you can use to build these maps. And there's certainly no shortage of them. It's really just a question of which one fits your skill set best. Again, these are mapping tools. They're not interactive modeling tools where you then are able to connect to execute and activate other remote systems. They're really more palettes, and to actually put those tools, put those maps into action, you do need some sort of journey orchestration and decisioning engine. Amanda is asking about Microsoft. We didn't have Microsoft as having a journey orchestration play, and that's correct. I mean, there's people will definitely use Visio to do journey mapping, but in terms of actually journey orchestration, omni-channel journey orchestration, Microsoft, like many elements of MarTech, is somewhat limited. They do have in the Dynamics ecosystem a CRM and a marketing platform, and they've just put a CDP behind the two of those that we're now evaluating. And so within the context of their marketing platform, you can build some very outbound email-centered journeys, but it's not really true omni-channel orchestration. So Microsoft is AWOL in this space. And to be fair, it's not necessarily a large technology space. It's an emerging technology space. So it's not unusual that a vendor like Microsoft might take a pass. Adobe is also really kind of limited in this space because of limitations of campaign, but Adobe has been talking recently about maybe taking another run at this in a more omni-channel way, as opposed to something connected to their outbound campaign platform. So with that, we've reached the bottom half of the hour, and wanted to just thank you again for participating. Hope to see you next time. In a couple of weeks, you might also be interested in our 2020 predictions webinar, which my colleague Jared will be hosting 2 weeks from today. So till then, this is Tony Byrne and Scott Dill from Real Story Group, wishing you a great rest of your week. Bye now.